Hello, welcome to the Naftiko Capabilities podcast. My name is Ken Lane. I'm the Chief Community Officer here at Naftiko, but you might also know me as the API Evangelist. This is my new podcast where I sit down with interesting folks to talk about interesting things. And this week, Budha from Tyk and Supreet from Northwestern Mutual came by to one of my live Tuesday conversations, which happen every week at 10 a.m. Eastern, to talk API governance. And so when I sat down with them, I wanted to start with the basics. I asked Supreet, how does he view API governance?
Myself, Supreet Nagi, working for Northwestern Mutual, and today very happy to be able to share my personal views on how I look at governance specifically for APIs. And this is more and more solely coming from a practitioner point of view, right? Somebody who has applied this for many, many years, have seen it fail and have seen it scale well. So there is no affiliation to a tool, or there is no marriage to a particular concept here as such. So I think all I'm happy to share is because I've seen multiple other companies like ours, which are not technology companies, but they are digital, right? So I just take a quick second to explain what I mean by that. There are many, many companies which are like not the Googles of the world. They're not like they don't have everything at their disposal to do things the way they would like it. But then they're somewhere in the middle. They're Fortune 100, 200 companies. They have a lot of legacy to deal with. And like everybody else, about 7, 10 years back, they attended a town hall and an executive said, hey, API first. That's the right thing to do it. All the industry leaders are doing it. We should also do it. And then the market demanded it, right? The monetization of APIs came in. Then the business to business integration through API became the new buzzword. So coming from that era, my take on API governance is specifically that how can we make it so seamless that we eventually start to call it as zero touch governance? We get to a state where the governance is not an afterthought. It's not a gate, it's not a checkpoint that a developer or any other person in an organization has to think about. It is baked into the very fabric of the development cycle itself. How does it become so seamless that if I were to say this, the compliant suggested way is the most easiest and the most secured way of creating an API. And if we achieve that in an organization organically, it starts to solve a lot of problem for the companies that they face today. So that's my take on governance, and that's why I've been enthusiastic about sharing what we have achieved. But I've been a great partner. We spoke about like 4 or 5 different conferences so far. And then I'm actually writing a book about it. And now we are calling it as zero touch governance. So that kind of stands well with everyone. So that's my take on it. And I'm sure we can discuss more and dig down.
I like it. Welcome to the club, Supreet. Definitely looking forward to amplifying your book. It's a good one, and I love the approach of making API governance seamless. But let's hear what Budha has to say when it comes to his view of API governance. I know he's got a wealth of experience and opinions here as well.
A couple of things there. I think one of the biggest things that I felt when I was reading sort of Supreet's draft and when we're presenting this together, I think the framing of governance towards something as zero touch is quite important, simply because the way there is sort of a preconceived notion when it comes to things like governance and control, and like there is an element of, oh, this is going to stop me. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be friction. What do I need to make this happen? Is it going to get in the way of doing things? Whereas when you're reframing that into a world of a zero touch or governance by design, for instance, those kind of things pretty much say, this is just going to work. You don't have to worry about taking these X number of additional steps to get to the point where things are going to be usable. They're going to be usable by design. You will have the guardrails that are already part of the platform itself, and you can now reliably, consistently utilize those platforms to do your work on a day-to-day basis. Ultimately, we just want to get the work done. That's kind of the whole point of all of this. So to me, governance, whether that's API governance or AI governance or data governance, whatever label you want to put, whatever prefix you want to put ahead of it, it's about how these entities show up. Essentially, like if I have to almost anthropomorphize governance and APIs in a way, it's about how they show up. It's about consistency, reliability, and basically making sure that things remain predictable as much as possible, that what's worked yesterday ideally should work tomorrow and today. If there is some degree of predictability, we know that things are going to work in a certain way. There are going to be certain conventions that can be followed. There can be certain policies that's going to enforce those sort of conversations that we have had across those stakeholders, meeting those outcomes. So that degree of consistency and how those APIs are going to show up, essentially, or how those data sources are essentially going to show up, that to me is what governance provides. It's that sort of framework and reliability that will help us do work better or help APIs deliver better value. So that to me is what governance is. So that framing of zero touch becomes more important, because now you're thinking about governance a little bit differently than something additional that you need to do, but something that is already available to you to do better things.
I like it. It's definitely why I call the API Evangelist Governance Newsletter, parentheses, guidance. It's got to be baked in. It's got to be the guardrails. But I think one big challenge with this is, how do you get everyone to agree on what is governance and what should be baked in? And so I asked Supreet what his thoughts were on getting people on the same page.
Yeah, I will. And the entire book that I wrote is like a very small, like 25, 30 pages book. And it's basically the same concept of what you exactly asked. Like, how do I get started? What is my advice to the executive? Because it's more of a cultural shift than anything else, right? You can do good things with a bad tool and do the bad things with a good tool. So again, coming to your question, I'll give you a very quick history here. So about 6, 7 years back, I was sitting in like an executive meeting, and then we are talking about, hey, we have had multiple not so successful attempts about getting the API first, like into the ground. What are we missing? And one of a very fine gentleman, he just made a comment about something, and he said, hey, if you're trying to build something like a model like this, somebody has to lose. Like, not everybody can win. And that stuck personally to me. It's like, no, why do somebody needs to lose if you're talking about governance? That's the shift we need to bring in. So this entire model is based on how do we make sure everybody wins? Like, and that's how I end my book, saying, hey, at the end, everybody wins. So we, like Buddha was saying, we've been through iterations of this. I generally use a very objective way, and I say, every practitioner who's sitting at a seat of advantage in an organization where they started this journey or they're about to start this journey, and thanks to agentic AI, people are even now back in, that the entire enthusiasm about getting API governance right is back in. So if you are in that seat, if you're in that phase in your organization, you should start with the capability maturity model of what the governance looks like, right? Make a model, a bidirectional model around, hey, this is what the end future looks like. What is good enough for my organization? And then how long will I get? And then start to chalk a path out and then iterate over there. That's the practical way of getting started, rather than just hoping for, hey, it can only be materialistic when I have the entire the model ready to go. Yes, identify the personas. It's very, very important that if we talk to the personas that are vested, they will get impacted by the model right from day one, to make sure that it's not just the developer and the consumer. There is architects that are involved in ensuring consistency. There are governance inspector. There is information and risk compliance that needs to ensure the API security standards are being implemented consistently. Then there is a retirement workflow that takes care of cleaning it up, right? So there are automated retirement workflows. That's where app development product people come in, and they weigh in and saying, hey, how long is it good enough to continue to support an older version? When do we start to cut the cord on? So all of these personas needs to come in and make sure that we understand their point of view, what is their win in this model, and then start to draw it. That's the approach we took, and we feel very confident that we were able to successfully scale it up. One of the things that personally I'm very satisfied about is that this entire way of working ensure consistency. One of the biggest thing is that, hey, there's pocket in the teams who are like really good at it and they write really nice business oriented APIs, whereas there's another team where like writing all the APIs left and right. So how do, as an executive, I call it as a journey from an invisible liability to visible value, right? That's your journey, because it's literally an invisible liability if you don't understand the API sprawl that you have, the API jungle that you have. But then if you start to trim it down and bring consistency along and make sure every single API is adding to the business value that your company owns, you are marching towards a visible value. So that's the iterative journey that we have over last few years. And very excited. That's why I feel I get pumped up when I get to talk about it. It's like, hey, I should share it with others. We should all share it with each other. We're all in this together to help each other.
An essential part of being an evangelist, spreading the word, spreading the gospel. Let's hear what Budha has to say when it comes to getting people on the same page when it comes to what API governance means.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think quantifying the value of API governance can be quite tricky because we're kind of trying to eliminate certain negatives, or at least that's how it's perceived. Like you say, sort of eliminating some of the shadow APIs or eliminating some of the API sprawl that only becomes quantifiable once something goes wrong. When someone exploits that security breach in some way or breaches that security gap that you weren't even aware of, that's when you start putting a dollar value to it, and that's when it becomes a problem. So until that has happened, that's where you can't put a dollar value to it, and therefore you can't assign what's the point of having a strong API governance in there, because you kind of it's risk reduction to a point. So I think that's where that becomes a bit of a challenge. But having said that, I think this is where, interesting enough, I think there is a degree of advocacy, championship, and evangelism that might also be worthwhile pursuing. Because I think what Supreet was able to do, at least from his story so far, was able to sort of bring to light some of those key elements that people could get wrong by virtue of having or not having true API governance as part of their overall API ecosystem stack. So I think that's quite valuable to have that as well, as someone who truly believes that this is a worthwhile pursuit and we're going to be seeing results as a consequence of this investment. It's not going to be easy because there'll be enough detractors. So you need to be a true believer, which is where evangelists and advocacy sort of comes in my opinion. But that's true for a lot of adoption for technology in general. I think I've seen a similar cycle at Tyk, for instance, when we were adopting OpenAPI, when we were adopting OpenTelemetry. A lot of that was driven by champions internally to say, we know this is the value we're going to be able to achieve. Let's start with certain experimentation to make sure that we are on the right path, and then go all into that. And that's where that model of testing iteratively, delivering value iteratively becomes more and more important. Because again, if you go full on with a huge 5-year API governance project, to then whether you're going to see the value at the end of 5 years, especially when landscapes are changing and shifting so very quickly, it's a bit of a stretch. Like even you can't confidently say you're going to see the right value because, again, your stakeholders might have changed, your end users might have changed. So then who is that value ultimately going to be for? You might have changed and moved on from that organization overall. So like that doesn't really compute. So I think to be able to go iteratively demonstrating values on a smaller scale and building on top of that becomes important. And that's where sort of the champion advocacy sort of helps drive that, especially when things are not going down that path. And then when you pair that up with something that Supreet also mentioned was around the maturity models, like people like thinking in models and frameworks sometimes. So to be able to know they're making certain progress, even if they have started at the very first stage, to know that they're making progress across, or at least working towards progressing or accelerating certain levels of maturity, it does help guide the thinking thought process a little bit better. So when I usually conduct these road mapping workshops with the API platform maturity model, a lot of those conversations, the point of that is to bring in a lot of those stakeholders in that room. Like you say, it's not easy to do that, especially if it's remote working world and not in-person working world. And then to be able to agree towards a shared mission towards things that we can focus on, because there could be 10 different things you could be doing that could potentially contribute towards your governance maturity or API management maturity or any of those different elements. But if you can get the 2 to 3 key stakeholders focusing on a singular direction for the next 6 months and demonstrate exactly what we're going to be able to achieve together, I think that is really, really powerful. So get the people in the room, have the process to back it up so that they can think things through a little bit better, and then ideally demonstrate value as much as possible as you go along.
Important work. Budha and Tyk rock at this. They have everything from their webinars and their meetings that they hold all the way up to the conferences that they do when it comes to API governance, as well as finance and other areas. And Supreet has also just published his book, self-published a book, From Chaos to Connectivity, the API Practitioner's Handbook. I'm going to make sure, along with this podcast, do some storytelling on API Evangelist. So you should be able to find a link to the book and to what they're doing over at Tyk when it comes to governance leadership and spreading the conversation of what's happening from a service provider view. But that's why I really like what Supreet's doing, because it's part of a practitioner group of people who are publishing content, going to these conferences and speaking, sharing their knowledge. And I think that, combined with the service provider support that companies like Tyk and Naftiko bring to the table, is an important part of this equation. We just got to find that right balance between service provider and practitioner and what everyone needs when they go home and are running their businesses. Anyways, all right, that's it for today. I appreciate you tuning in, and until next time. One more thing while I got you, talk about my Naftiko signals research again. I've been profiling a bunch of different enterprise organizations. I'm now up to 275, and I'm pausing there and kind of wrapping up all the data from that, the concepts they're investing in, the services and tools and standards they're using. But I'll be publishing a Naftiko Signals Impact Report, which takes all of that research and publishes how companies are holding up when it comes to all the latest waves of AI that have kind of crashed on the shores of enterprises, from LLMs to RAG to now agent skills and MCP. So anyways, I'll be publishing that report and all of that data as part of Naftiko Signals. If you want to get more information, ask more questions, feel free to just email me at kinlane@naftiko.io, and you can find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. All right. Appreciate it.